Christmas Nightmare House. We were just out for a good time. The plan was simple, a fun day at the Christmas village. Just the five of us, co-workers and close friends, ready to dive headfirst into the holiday spirit. And maybe it could have been the perfect day. But how on earth were we supposed to know that the cozy, festive house covered in lights and snow wasn't actually Santa's workshop? "Isn't this just amazing?" said Sarah, my wife, as we stepped into the Christmas village. And she wasn't wrong. The place was a sight to see. An open field on the edge of town had been turned into what looked like the North Pole come to life. Quaint little buildings lined the pathways, each styled to look like shops and cottages straight out of a Christmas story. There were candy-themed displays, toy workshops, and strings of colored lights everywhere you looked. The whole place sparkled like something out of a dream. Actors dressed as Santa's helpers strolled around, staying in character, chatting with visitors, and selling souvenirs. A petting zoo let kids, and tipsy adults like us, feed reindeer, and they even had a full sleigh hooked up to a team of 9 reindeer for parade rides. Santa himself sat on a throne at the top of a snowy hill, surrounded by twinkling pine trees and brightly wrapped presents, happily posing for pictures with families. It was perfect. Too perfect, in fact. Because somewhere in all that holiday cheer there was a house. And that house was something else entirely. The day had started off great. It was a chilly Saturday, and we'd been looking forward to this trip all week. My wife, Sarah, and our friends were practically buzzing with excitement as we explored the village. We hit up every shop, tried every seasonal treat, and laughed our way through every silly game. There wasn't a Christmas-themed cocktail we didn't sample or a reindeer we didn't pat. We took pictures with Santa, joked around with the actors, and just let ourselves get swept up in the magic of the place. It really was magical, until we stumbled upon the workshop. "What's that down there?" asked Mike, squinting down a quiet little side street that nobody else seemed to notice. "Only one way to find out," laughed Emily, her cheeks flushed from both the cold and the mulled wine. "Let's check it out. I mean, it's gotta be something cool, right?" Fueled by good cheer and maybe a little too much eggnog, we all followed Emily's lead, singing bits of carols as we made our way down the narrow street. When we got to the end, we stopped in our tracks. What we found there was unbelievable. "They went all out on this one," said Dave, his voice full of awe. "Seriously. Look at the detail. They even hired real little people to play the elves." I stared a little closer, trying to take it all in. Sure enough, the people dressed as elves were tiny. None of them could have been taller than 4 feet. They weren't just standing around for photos, either. They were moving fast, rushing back and forth like they were gearing up for something big. "Unreal," I murmured, watching the vapor from my breath curl into the cold air. Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. "It's freezing out here. Why don't we head inside Santa's workshop? I bet it's nice and warm in there." The workshop looked just like the kind of place you'd imagine Santa working in. It was decked out in red, white, green, silver, and gold. The whole thing had a charming, old-fashioned vibe, with architecture that looked straight out of the 15th century. The grounds were dotted with snowmen, little pine trees, and oversized candy canes. A soft, golden light glowed from the windows, spilling a warm invitation into the cold air, and a thick plume of white smoke curled lazily from the chimney. The cold was biting now, sharper than it had been all day. That cozy-looking building was calling to all of us. We quickly agreed it was a great idea to check it out, and started walking over. The elves outside seemed too busy to pay us much attention as they rushed around with purpose, but one of them caught my eye. He glanced at us, his face stern, and shook his head slightly before hurrying away. Something about him felt off, though I couldn't quite figure out what it was. "Hurry up, man!" shouted Dave, snapping me out of my thoughts. He and the others were already at the door. I jogged to catch up. Joel had opened the door and was holding it for everyone as we stepped inside. The inside was bright and warm, but not in an overwhelming way. The light was gentle, like the kind you'd feel standing in a field on the first sunny day of spring. The air smelled sweet, like cookies fresh out of the oven. It was instantly comforting. The entryway was a wide, open room, dressed up with festive decorations. A small desk sat near the back wall, and behind it stood a short man in an elf costume. He waved us over with a cheerful grin. "Welcome," he said, his voice light and friendly. "Before you head into the workshop, I'll need you to sign the guest registry." "What's in there?" asked Emily, her curious eyes fixed on the door behind him. The little man's smile stretched wider. "Oh, it's a magical place," he said, almost singing the words. "A place where wonders never end, and everyone gets exactly what they deserve." Joel laughed. "Well, I deserve $1,000,000. Let's sign this thing and see what's inside." We were all in high spirits, and still buzzing from the day's fun. None of us had any reason to suspect that signing that book would turn our perfect day into something we'd never forget, and not in a good way. The registry looked old, the kind of book you'd find in a dusty museum. Each page was covered in fancy, swirling calligraphy that was impossible to read. At the bottom of each page, there was a thick line with a bold X marking the spot for signatures. The paper felt strange, almost leathery, and the pen was a proper fountain pen that left deep, dark ink strokes that changed thickness with every movement. Something tugged at the back of my mind. A tiny whisper of unease. "What does this say?" I asked, glancing at the illegible text as I signed my name. "Oh, just the usual legal mumbo-jumbo," said the elf, his tone dismissive. "You know how lawyers are. Everything's about liability these days." His response made me laugh, and Sarah and Dave chuckled too. Joel shot Sarah a mock serious look, and she cracked up even harder. By the time we'd all signed, the elf pushed open the door with a theatrical sweep of his arm. The scene on the other side made the women gasp and left the rest of us wide-eyed with amazement. It was like stepping into every childhood dream of Santa's workshop. Toys were everywhere, arranged in neat rows or stacked high, while elves bustled around making more. Their voices filled the space with cheerful chatter, laughter, and snippets of carols. But as I stood there, taking it all in, something clicked in my head. "Guys," I said, my voice hesitant. "These elves, they're different. They're proportioned like regular people, just shrunk down." "So what?" said Dave with a shrug. "Good for them. Now come on. This is the most incredible setup I've ever seen. Let's enjoy it." And with that, he strode forward, completely at ease. But my unease lingered, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts as we stepped further into the workshop. I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. Something about these elves wasn't sitting right with me. People with dwarfism are usually disproportionate to a full-sized person, larger heads, shorter limbs. But these actors weren't like that. They were more like pygmies, their bodies perfectly proportioned, just incredibly small. That's extremely rare, and it didn't make sense how a small, seasonal fair could find so many of them. "The elves in the rest of the village are full-sized people," I muttered, trying to piece it together. "But these are..." "Enough already!" Sarah cut me off, giving me a playful shove through the door. The others followed close behind, their excitement bubbling over. At first, everything seemed fine. Everything was just as magical as it had looked from the other room. But then, a new figure stepped into the workshop, and things started to change. "Look!" Emily squealed, clapping her hands. "It's Santa!" At first glance, it really did seem like Santa. A large man in an old-fashioned Santa suit, brown and green, the kind you'd see in vintage Christmas cards before Coca-Cola made red the standard. His long, white beard flowed from under a hood, and he carried a massive sack over one shoulder. In his other hand, he held a gleaming scroll that seemed to shimmer in the warm light. His face was mostly hidden in the shadow of his hood, but his booming voice rang out, filling the room. "Welcome," he said, the words echoing off the walls. "It is time to check your signatures against the list and see if you're naughty or nice." The others gasped and cheered, their faces lit with childlike delight. But something about him made my skin crawl. His nose, it was long and pointed, jutting out from his hood. Wasn't Santa supposed to have a button nose? I shook my head, trying to brush the thought away. "It's just an actor," I told myself. Not every Santa has to look like the storybook version. Still, something didn't feel right. Why was the most elaborate, impressive attraction in the entire village hidden away down a quiet side street? Shouldn't this workshop have been front and center, the main draw of the whole place? The questions circled in my head, but I pushed them down, telling myself I was being ridiculous. It's just part of the show. Stop overthinking it. Joel Donaldson, Santa announced, his voice low and thunderous. Yours is the first name signed. Time to see if you're naughty or nice. Joel stepped forward with a theatrical bow, a grin stretched wide across his face. The drinks we'd had earlier had definitely loosened him up. Well, I'm ready for my present, he declared, his tone playful and full of confidence. You will receive your just reward, Santa intoned, his voice taking on a solemn edge. He unrolled the scroll, letting it unfurl dramatically, and began to read. Joel Donaldson, you are on the naughty list. Oh. Joel mockingly waved his hands, laughing. Guess I've been a bad boy. The elves stopped what they were doing and turned to face us. One by one, they began to chant, their voices high and melodic. Naughty list! Naughty list! You are on the naughty list! They moved closer, circling around Joel with wide, unsettling smiles plastered across their smooth faces. Santa stepped to the side, revealing a large chair that hadn't been there a moment ago. Come, he commanded, gesturing toward the seat. Receive your reward. The elves pressed in, their chanting growing louder as they nudged Joel toward the chair. Naughty list! Naughty list! You are on the naughty list! Joel, still laughing, played along, thinking it was all part of the fun. He walked past Santa and flopped into the chair with exaggerated flair. And then everything changed. The chair came alive. Thick, spiked leather straps shot out, wrapping around Joel's body in a horrifying embrace. They tightened, pinning him down, and I saw his grin falter as he realized something was very, very wrong. The straps dug into his skin, and spots of blood began to bloom on his clothes, dark red circles spreading across the fabric. For a moment, none of us could move. The room seemed to hold its breath, and a chilling silence fell, broken only by Joel's strained, panicked breaths. That was the moment we realized the truth. This wasn't a show. This wasn't a game. Whatever this place was, it was no Christmas wonderland. Joel screamed, his voice cracking with pain and panic as he struggled against the straps binding him to the chair. What are you doing to me? He shouted, thrashing his head and swiping helplessly at the spiked leather that bit into his skin. The elves' laughter filled the air, their high, musical tones twisting into something sinister as they chanted in unison. Naughty list! Naughty list! Their cheerful rhythm turned darker with every word, each syllable dripping with malice. Suddenly, the floor in front of Joel opened, and an ornate office desk rose from the opening. It was stacked high with papers, old-fashioned writing tools, and bound ledgers. The elves went silent, and Santa stepped forward, his booming voice taking on an unsettling mix of authority and cruelty. Joel Donaldson, he began. You have been a very naughty boy. Using your position as an accountant to cook the books, skimming money from your employer into your own pockets. Joel's face twisted in fury and fear. That's a lie, he shouted, his voice shaking. Let me out of here. I swear to God I'll sue you all for this. The rest of us stood frozen, too stunned to act. This was supposed to be a light-hearted day, a fun, festive outing with friends. None of us could process what was happening, our minds struggling to reconcile the cheerful Christmas village we'd just been in with the horror unfolding before us. Santa laughed, a deep, malevolent sound that echoed through the room. It wasn't the jolly chuckle you'd associate with the holiday icon. This laugh was heavy with malice, each note sending chills down my spine. The straps around Joel tightened and shifted, dragging across his body like rough sandpaper. His clothing shredded under the pressure, and streaks of blood appeared on his skin, blooming through the tears in the fabric. His screams echoed off the walls. An elf approached the desk, placing a quill pen in Joel's hand. Then, with eerie precision, the elf slid a massive, leather-bound ledger in front of him. Joel tried to drop the pen, but the straps punished him, tightening again and raking across his body. He cried out in agony as the elf calmly picked up the pen and forced it back into his trembling hand. "Your punishment," Santa announced with cold finality, "is to correct the errors in these books. Every one of them represents the dishonesty of men like you, liars who abuse their positions to steal. You'll complete the task by hand, the old-fashioned way. And if I refuse?" Joel ground out through clenched teeth, his face contorted in pain. Santa chuckled, his tone dripping with mockery. "If you refuse, the straps will punish you. If you make mistakes, the straps will punish you. If you fall asleep, the straps will punish you. Make enough mistakes, and the straps will not stop. They will shred you piece by piece until there's nothing left." "No!" Joel screamed as the chair tilted forward, slamming him into the desk with a sickening force. The straps pinned him down so tightly he could barely move, his chest heaving as he sobbed in pain and terror. The elves resumed their chant, their sing-song voices ringing out with twisted glee. "Naughty list! Naughty list! You are on the naughty list!" With trembling hands, Joel reached for the top paper on the pile. As he pulled it free, several other papers slid off the stack and fell onto the desk. The straps reacted immediately, raking across his body with brutal force. Blood spattered onto the desk as Joel's screams rose above the elves' chanting. Santa's booming laughter echoed through the room as the door on the far wall swung open. The four of us who remained screamed in unison, bolting for the door we had entered through. But no matter how hard we pulled, pushed, or pounded, it wouldn't budge. Our cries for help were met only with Santa's laughter and the elves' joyous refrain of, "Naughty list! Naughty list! You must go forward!" Santa commanded, his voice booming with authority. "Go forward and receive your just reward!" We fought against the elves as they closed in around us, their chanting shifting to, "Just reward! Just reward!" With overwhelming force, they pushed us toward the open doorway. As Joel's screams continued behind us, I realized the horrifying truth: he was never meant to survive this task. The chair, the straps, it was all designed to torture him, to slowly kill him as he fought in vain to complete an impossible job. The four of us stumbled through the open door, the sound of Santa's evil laughter and the elves' chants following us. The door slammed shut behind us, sealing us in a new room. The lights flickered on, bathing us in a soft glow as we pounded on the door, screaming to be let out. Then we heard it, a low hum of voices. Turning slowly, we saw the source. The room was filled with people crammed into old-fashioned telephone booths. They were babbling incoherently into the receivers, their faces twisted in pain. Occasionally, one would drop the phone, racked with a violent coughing fit, spitting up blood before picking it back up to continue their nonsensical rambling. Our screams caught in our throats as we took in the nightmarish scene. Whatever punishment awaited us, it was clear, we hadn't escaped the horror. We were simply moving deeper into it. A column of elves marched into the room from a hidden door, their wicked smiles lighting up their eerie faces. They moved with grim purpose, inspecting the phone booths one by one. Some performed repairs, while others connected hoses to nozzles on the sides of the booths. With a blast of high-pressure water, they washed away blood, the streams draining somewhere unseen, their origin and destination equally horrifying to imagine. A familiar, booming laugh signaled the arrival of Krampus. He appeared behind the row of phone booths, his dark presence looming over the room. "Carol Jenkins," he announced, his voice sharp as a blade. "Time to see if you've been naughty or nice." The scroll unfurled in his hand, but before he could read it, I found my voice. "Wait!" I shouted, my desperation making my voice crack. "What kind of Santa's workshop is this? Santa doesn't hurt people. The worst he does is leave coal for naughty kids." The room fell silent except for Krampus's deep, menacing chuckle. It wasn't the cheerful laugh of Santa, but a low, chilling sound that rattled in his chest. "Santa Claus?" he mocked. "What makes you think I'm Santa Claus? Is it the robe?" He straightened to his full, towering height and threw back his hood, revealing his grotesque visage. His face was like twisted, gnarled wood, etched with hollow eyes that seemed to see straight through you. His long, pointed nose and crooked smile only added to the nightmarish effect. "Behold!" he bellowed, spreading his arms wide. "I am Krampus, and I punish the wicked!" We stared in horror at the figure before us, his grotesque hands gnarled and clawed, his bag now open at his feet, revealing nothing but stout reeds and human bones. "I am not here to reward the nice list," he continued. "I carry only the naughty list, and for those whose names are written here, justice awaits. Justice is harsh." Carol's face drained of color as she stumbled backward, her lips trembling as she tried to speak, but no words came out. Krampus unfurled the scroll. "Carol Jenkins," he announced, his voice thundering. "You are on the naughty list!" The elves sprang into action, singing their haunting chant. "Naughty list! Naughty list! You are on the naughty list!" They swarmed Carol, grabbing her despite her screams and frantic attempts to escape. They dragged her toward Krampus, who loomed over her like a shadow made flesh. "You are a gossip," Krampus declared coldly. "Your wicked tongue spreads lies and ruins lives. You destroy reputations and relationships with no thought for the harm you cause." Carol's screams grew louder as she fought against the elf's grip, but it was useless. Krampus snatched her up in one massive hand, pulling her close to his horrifying face. "As punishment," he said, his voice dripping with malice, "you must confess the truth to every single one of your victims." The floor opened beside him, and a new phone booth rose from the ground. The elves' chant grew louder. "Naughty list! Naughty list! You are on the naughty list! But you won't be using that lying tongue," Krampus continued. "A deceitful tool has no place in honest confession." Carol's screams became panicked sobs as she begged for mercy. Krampus shoved his gnarled fingers into her mouth, forcing it open wider than humanly possible. Her muffled cries turned to shrieks as he gripped her tongue and yanked it free in one swift, brutal motion. Blood sprayed from her mouth as she writhed in agony. Krampus discarded her severed tongue like trash, then held out his hand. A grinning elf approached, placing a small candy cane in it. With a sneer, Krampus shoved the candy into Carol's gaping mouth. The bleeding stopped instantly, but it wasn't mercy, it was a cruel final touch. Without hesitation, Krampus threw her into the phone booth and slammed the door shut. "Call them!" he commanded. "Confess your slander to every one of your victims. Only then will you be free to leave." Carol beat on the glass, her screams muffled but desperate. It was no use. The booth was a prison, as inescapable as the horror that filled the room. Another door opened at the far end of the room. "Go!" Krampus ordered, his voice echoing in the silence that followed Carol's torment. "Go forward and receive your just reward." The elves surrounded us once more, their cold, iron grips pushing us toward the open doorway. Sarah sobbed uncontrollably, her shoulders shaking as tears streamed down her face. John shouted futile protests, his voice filled with rage and desperation. I stayed silent. There was no point in crying or yelling. We were trapped, completely at their mercy. We stumbled through the door, the elves shoving us the final few steps. The door slammed shut behind us, plunging us into darkness. The silence was deafening. My heart pounded as I strained to see, every second in the dark feeling like an eternity. Hello? I whispered into the void, my voice trembling. A low grinding noise broke the stillness as part of the wall shifted. A roaring fireplace was revealed, its flames casting an eerie, flickering light over the room. The warmth it radiated should have been comforting, but instead, it was ominous. The flames licked the edges of a wrought iron bed frame in the center of the room, its surface a cold iron slab. Chains dangled from the head and foot of the bed, and the rest of the room was empty, void of life or hope. The fire flared, licking higher into the room. From the inferno stepped Krampus, his form silhouetted against the blaze. Behind him came the ever-present elves, their smiles gleaming in the flickering light. Krampus raised the scroll once more, his booming voice filling the room. "John Valentine," he declared. You are on the naughty list! The elves pounced, dragging John as he kicked and screamed. Naughty list! Naughty list! You are on the naughty list! They sang, their voices gleeful and merciless. John's protests were drowned out by their chant as they strapped him to the iron slab, chains binding his wrists and ankles. His struggles were useless, and the fire roared higher, reflecting the torment yet to come. Krampus nodded slowly, his glowing eyes fixed on me. And you never truly will, he said, his voice steady and unrelenting. All you need to know is that I am tasked with rewarding people for the evil they commit. Not evil as humans define it, but by a universal truth, a truth many deny even exists. I swallowed hard, my voice barely a whisper. What truth is that? The universe operates under immutable rules, Krampus explained. Good and evil exist because of these rules. Good is whatever aligns with them, and evil is whatever breaks them. The catch, of course, is that your kind is bound to break them. The only question is which rules you break, and how often. Something about his explanation enraged me. To hear that good and evil were universal, unchanging, and that humanity had no say in the matter, it was too much. That doesn't give you the right to just murder people, I shouted, my voice rising with all the pain, sadness, and fury I had bottled up. The outburst left me drained. I slumped back into the chair, feeling utterly spent. Just kill me, I muttered, barely able to lift my head. Get it over with. Stop toying with me. Krampus chuckled, and for the first time, it sounded genuine, almost amused. Kill you? He said, shaking his head. No. You're not on the naughty list. Instead, I'm going to give you a gift. Before I could ask what he meant, he moved. With terrifying speed, he seized the front of my shirt in one massive, gnarled hand, lifting me off the ground. His hood fell back, revealing horns like a goat's and hair that writhed as though it had a life of its own. His mouth stretched impossibly wide, a dark, yawning chasm that seemed ready to swallow me whole. Then he exhaled. The breath that poured over me was suffocating, a putrid wave of carrion rot mixed with mint and cloves. I gagged, trying desperately to hold my breath, but my body betrayed me. With a gasp, I sucked in the vile air, my lungs filling with it. The stench overwhelmed me, and I coughed violently, my chest heaving as my lungs rebelled. At first, there was only revulsion. I gagged and sputtered, my entire body convulsing. But then it shifted. My breath deepened, as though my lungs could suddenly take in more air than ever before. I inhaled until there was no more to take, and Krampus dropped me to the floor like a rag doll. I lay there coughing and choking, my body rejecting the clean air as though it no longer belonged. Krampus loomed over me, silent and imposing, waiting. When I finally steadied myself, I stood on shaky legs and looked up at him. His hood was once again pulled low, hiding his face, though his ember-like eyes glowed in the darkness. What now? I croaked, my voice hoarse. A door creaked open, revealing a snowy landscape. Krampus gestured toward it. Now you go out into the world, he said, his voice growing deeper and more ominous. And see it for what it truly is. That is your gift. You will always know the truth about the people you meet. Never again will you be deceived. I opened my mouth to question him, but he raised a hand, silencing me. Go, he commanded, his booming voice echoing in the room. Leave my workshop and never return. I stumbled toward the door, stepping into the familiar snow-covered village. Everything appeared as it had before we found the cursed workshop. People laughed and played, the air filled with the sounds of joy and holiday cheer. The village seemed untouched, as though the horrors I had experienced had never happened. I turned back, expecting to see the workshop, but it was gone. In its place was the bustling town center, filled with shops and carnival games. A vendor nearby called out, offering hot spiced mead and mulled wine to the merry crowd. I needed a drink. I hurried to the vendor, eager to drown my sorrows, but as I approached, I stopped in my tracks. Something was wrong. I stared at the man behind the counter, and suddenly I knew. I knew who he was, what he was. It was as clear as if it were written on his face. He was a con man. He sold cheap drinks under the guise of premium ones. He was a habitual liar, charming gullible women into his bed before moving to the next town. Worse, I knew he had murdered his own mother for life insurance, and carried oleander poison in his pocket to dispose of those who might pose a threat. "What can I get you?" he asked cheerfully, his wide smile betraying none of the darkness I now saw so plainly. "Do you have anything stronger than wine?" I asked, my voice cold and distant. I wanted nothing from this man. He gestured to a nearby building marked simply, "Bar." "If you're looking for liquor, that's the place," he said, his cheer undiminished. I nodded, murmured a thank you, and walked away. But I didn't go to the bar. I turned down the street, heading for the village's edge. I wanted nothing to do with the fair, the people, or the memories it held. I needed to get away, to put as much distance between myself and the Christmas village as possible. Krampus's gift was no blessing. It was a curse, a permanent, unrelenting truth. And with it, I knew I would never look at the world the same way again.